All right, so to start our convention, first of all, thank you so much, Lindsay, for agreeing to change the time of your plenary session. Lindsay Clanfield, I guess that you all know who he is, but I would like to mention some of his achievements. He's an award-winning writer, teacher trainer, and international speaker in the field of English language teaching. He has written or co-written several course books and is the main author of the new young adult course, Studio, published by Helbling Languages. He is the series editor of a range of teacher development books and has co-written various methodology books for teachers. He is also the creative force behind various web projects, including the popular blog 6 Things, the e-publishing collective The Round, and the sci-fi adventure materials website Extreme Language Teaching. Welcome, Lindsay. And I would like to give you, in the name of TESOL-SPAIN, a small token, a souvenir of Salamanca.
Okay, I'll just get myself set up here. Perdón, ¿se puede? Just a moment. First of all, while our colleague comes and helps me out with this, nice to see so many of you, so many familiar faces here. Thank you very much to TESOL-SPAIN for inviting me. Thank you to my publisher, Helbling, for sponsoring and making this possible. I'd also like, while we're just getting things ready here, to say thank you to the local organizers and especially the volunteers. I know the exquisite pleasure and pain of organizing a conference. We did it in Elche for TESOL-SPAIN a few years ago. So I think I'd like to give a round of applause to all the volunteers and the people who helped organize things here in Salamanca. As you know from the program, I was supposed to be giving the, not the opening plenary, which is intended to set the theme of the conference of inclusivity. I was giving tomorrow's plenary, which was going to be on a different, is on a different topic. It's the plenary I'm giving today. So I had two challenges when I was confronted with this. The first challenge had happened a little while ago because when I thought of this topic that I was doing, I thought, oh, I'm going to take something which could be considered like an existential threat to teachers and teaching. I'm going to be talking about automation and robots. Of course, now with what is happening with the coronavirus, I think automation and robots seems quite benign as a threat kind of thing, but it is something that is still being often talked about. And the second thing is that, again, I've been doing a bit of juggling to fit in the theme of inclusivity here, but it's a bit of a stretch, so I'm going to go ahead with what I had planned and mention some things at the end. Is that okay? Of course it's okay. If it's not okay, it's lo que hay. All right. Okay, so I'd like to start. I have been recently interested in a more critical look at technology. I gave a talk at TEFL. Some of you I recognize were there. You may have seen that. This is not the same talk, but it is along the same lines, which is a slightly critical look at technology. As someone who is a big fan of EdTech and a big user and a big proponent of education technology, I'd like to start by telling you a story, 3 little stories of 3 robots, okay? Because we're going to be talking about robots and automated language teaching here. The first story is one I have said before, but if you haven't heard it, it's just as well. It's a story of a robot called Robot Boris. Now, Robot Boris, this is, I'm going to take you back to 2018 in a town north of Moscow, around 200 kilometers north of Moscow, which had a festival called Proyektoria. This was a technology festival for young scientists in Russia. And part of the pièce de résistance, so this was to kind of encourage and educate young people to become more interested in sciences and especially robotics. Part of the pièce de résistance was they brought out a life-sized human robot, yeah? Oh, you've seen all of it. And so the robot came out and it did a little dance and it said, I like maths and I want to learn languages and so on. Several keen-eyed bloggers in the Russian blogosphere noticed some strange things about the robot. They said it was, why had we never heard about this amazing robot before? There'd been nothing online about it. No one could find anything online. It just had suddenly appeared. They also started saying, where are the sensors on the robot? Where, like, there don't seem to be any sensors on it. And then, of course, this being the internet, people started doing zooms of screenshots and pictures and noticed, why is it that the robot is not only human-sized, but doesn't that look like a bit of skin underneath there between the head and the body? Isn't that a neck? And then the worst part of all is at the end, it turned out, of course, that the robot was not a robot. It was a human inside the robot, and a picture from backstage emerged eventually of the robot being de-roboted, and that it was a young person inside there. It turns out that this had been put on by a costume company who, and the organizers later said, we never said it was a real robot. This was just to encourage people, although they kind of had said it was a real robot. So this could be considered an item of, like, the typical item of fake news, a fake kind of story of things happen. But it's not the first time that we've been fooled in this way. The next robot that I want to mention to you is a robot now that goes back more than 200 years. This is a robot called the Mechanical Turk. The Mechanical Turk, also referred to as the automaton, was a chess-playing robot. So it was designed in Hungary and toured around the great courts of Europe, the royal courts of Europe. It was in the 17 and 1800s. It would play a game of chess against a human opponent, and it beat such notable opponents as Napoleon Bonaparte and Benjamin Franklin. It toured the courts for around 80 years. And was hailed as a marvelous bit of technological wizardry, this Mechanical Turk. Of course, it emerged much later on that it wasn't really an automaton, it wasn't really a robot. It was underneath the sort of robot part was a tiny little cubby hole where a human being could fit in, crouched, and then would move levers to play the chess. And on the Wikipedia page for the automaton, it says that over 5 grand masters of chess had to work inside of this thing during the 80 years that it toured around Europe. So those are 2 robots that didn't seem to be what they were. The third one hits a bit closer to home, and it's also quite recent. Some of you may have heard of this, or Enki. You might not have heard of it, but when I show the picture, you might recognize this. This made a splash. This was a robot in South Korea who taught English. And here's the picture you may have seen. Anyone see this picture before of the robot teaching English? This is a robot teaching English to South Korean children. Of course, it wasn't really a robot. They didn't really try to pretend it was, although it did move around. It was, the screen there was connected via teleconference, where a teacher would conduct the class via the monitor, and then would move things, and the robot would move around. The person selling this, and this is a great quote, the company selling this said that Enki won't complain about health insurance, sick leave, and severance packages. They won't leave in 3 months for a better paying job in Japan. All you need to do is repair and upgrade the software every once in a while, the senior scientist said. So, again, not only though was it, there was a Skype call thing there. The teacher that you see on the screen was not, in fact, the face that you saw on the screen was not, in fact, even the real teacher. The real teacher was someone working at very low pay in the Philippines, and they put a Caucasian woman's head on the screen of the Enki. So, problematic on numerous levels, this one. So, 3 robots, all 3 of them not what they appeared to be, but all 3 of them part of a desire, a fear, a sort of obsession that we've had with robots for a long time, and also a desire to believe things that are possible of technology when maybe they're not, or not what they appear. Robots, of course, have had a long, distinguished history in the world of fiction and science fiction, and that's probably where most of us have most of our robot knowledge from, is probably either from a science fiction story, a television show, or a movie. Because this is an English teacher conference, there has to be a little bit of participation. It's the opening plenary. I'm not going to get you to do anything difficult, but I did find a picture of 15 famous robots. I'm going to show you the picture, and I want you to tell a partner, first of all, say hello, but bump elbows, don't shake hands. Say hello, and then I want you to see how many of these you can identify. Don't feel bad if you can only identify 2 or 3. I'm a geek, and I could only identify around 8 of them, but let's see, okay? So famous robots, 2 minutes, here you go. Okay, I'm going to reveal who they are. I'll show you another slide where you'll see the names, okay? And I'll just go through them quickly. I didn't realize that the screens would be smaller, so I will be reading some things from the slides, all right? I doubt anyone got all 15. Did anyone get all 15? Close? No. Okay. Well, anyway, you'll have known some of them. So there's R2-D2, RoboCop, Rodney Copperbottom, which seems like a Pixar one. Predator, K9 from Doctor Who, Johnny 5, I don't know what that one's from. Vincent from The Black Hole, Robbie the Robot, Twiki from Buck Rogers, another one from RoboCop called Ed 209, Data from Star Trek, C-3PO from Star Wars, the Cylons from Battlestar Galactica, Maximilian from I don't know what, and the Daleks from Doctor Who. So it's, for many of us, robots will have been, our knowledge of what robots are and what robots do will probably be based on one of these science fiction robots. The funny thing is for many people making robots now in robotics, their idea of robots have also come from these science fiction ones. And many of the things that robotics and people in artificial intelligence do, they're quite open about saying they are following things that they were like obsessed with as younger people when through science fiction and so on and so forth. And so what I want to zoom in here, which is more of interest to us, is the whole intersection between robots and language. Because in science fiction and in fiction in general, TV shows, movies, etc., robots and artificial intelligence and technology have interplayed with language in various ways, which I think has affected how artificial intelligence and robots now are being built to take on that language one. So I'm going to go through 4 famous robot artificial intelligence type things, and then to think about how this might be affecting what's going on today. So one of the earlier ones is 1963, the British television show Doctor Who. The robot was in fact built into the Doctor's, the lead character, the Doctor's kind of ship called the TARDIS, which is in a shape of a police box. And the machine you see there on the right is the control panel, where there was a telepathic field in that room which allowed the connection between the machine and the Doctor so that he could go off and meet alien races and talk to them, and the TARDIS would be translating for him. So it created a telepathic field. 1966 sees Star Trek, which probably affected a lot of what people in Silicon Valley wanted to do in terms of robotics and language things, the idea of the universal translator. So the universal translator, it was what the Nokia phone, remember the flip over Nokia phone? The design of that was based on the idea of Star Trek, the universal translator. Unlike other Star Trek technology, the universal translator rarely ever broke down in the show. So they would always have problems with, the ship is breaking, Captain, and this is breaking, but the universal translator always worked, for reasons I will say in a moment. But that was the thing that allowed the people from the spaceship to go and meet other alien people and understand each other. So far these are devices that people speak to and then can understand. You also have the role of an interpreter, the robot as interpreter, and this is where Star Wars comes in, and C-3PO, who also always refers to himself as a protocol droid, and goes about saying that he's fluent in 6 million forms of communication, etiquette, customs, and translation. And so that is how robots and language are viewed in that film series. And the last one, which also is being attempted to be replicated in many ways, is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in 1978. In The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, foreign languages could be negotiated through what was called the Babelfish. The Babelfish would be inserted into your ear, it would hear any language and translate simultaneously into the own language. So, in terms of robots and universal translators in fiction, a couple of things to say about this. That if you watch the shows, or lots of people who've kind of analyzed this, linguists, science fiction people who follow this, that the translation often continues even when there's no translator there. So once they establish it, then they're like, this is the translator, but then they would sometimes forget in Star Trek episodes, and so people would say, where's the translator? But it was sort of understood. Once it was done, it was out of the way. Also, curiously, with lots of these film translations, the characters' mouths move in sync with the translated words, which was always kind of strange. But why did this idea come into science fiction, especially in television and movies so much, was that, and we see it less now, but in the 60s and 70s, this removed the needs for extensive subtitles. So you just had all the actors speaking in English, and that was fine, right? And also it removed the problem that not every alien species speaking English, right? So some of the really old ones, the alien species comes down to Earth and miraculously they speak English and they never explain why. So this was sort of a device used in science fiction to sort of explain away that problem so that we could still have everybody speaking the same language on screen. Okay, so how has this sort of translated into what we're beginning to see now? And here I'm going to conflate two things. I'm going to conflate robots and artificial intelligence, because they're kind of going together more and more now as we get into language learning. So artificial intelligence, I know you won't be able to read this. I thought I'd have a bigger screen. I'll go through some of these things. Artificial intelligence is being explored a lot now in education, and the different areas that they think it can be, those who are proponents of it, think that it can be responsive in that it can interpret meaning from humans and formulate a response. It can take decisive action to change the program and readjust it to meet learning goals. It can adapt, apparently, and adjust behavior. And it says, or the idea is that artificial intelligence should be independent, that it should be able to conduct most of its decision-making process without human input. Let's remember that, because that's what they keep saying, that the artificial intelligence stuff should be able to eventually do it without the need for human input. Again, this is from CAPTCHA and others on what AI can do in education. The goals for AI, as stated by those who are trying to push it into education, is, first of all, they kind of talk about educational goals, like they want to increase retention, help students remember things more, increase outcomes, decrease time to completion, so make it go faster, and increase access. So the noble goal that everyone will have access to education via artificial intelligence. And the other one that they say as well, but I think is the main driver, is to lower costs of education. So a lot of that. What is happening with language learning is we are now seeing and I'll give you some examples of this, we're now seeing what is called natural language processing, where they're trying to develop artificial intelligence that will process language naturally. The most clear way I saw it explained was the following. The human talks to a machine. The machine captures the audio. The audio is converted to text, right? So there's sort of like the conversion to text, and then processing of the data of the text happens. The data is then converted back to audio, and the machine responds to the human by playing the audio file. Okay, this is what is called. This is a very simplified version of what they call natural language processing. If you're all thinking, well, I don't know if I've seen that, you have. If you've had or seen or used one of these devices. So if you use an Alexa or a Google Home or Siri on your phone or Cortana on a Windows thing, that's using natural language processing. They're trying to make it even more complex now, where they're trying to train the machine to learn this on its own. This is called neural machine translation. So the neural machine translation is an approach where they create a network that will try to predict a likely sequence of words. So if you have a certain amount of words, it's why, for example, Google can recognize a question, or Alexa might recognize a question even if you got the words around a little bit wrong. They have the process to be able to sort of, and that's why you probably mean this. So those are the two things that are happening in artificial intelligence and being put eventually, one hopes, they hope, into robots and automated stuff. So where are we now, though? One of the reasons I said I wanted to talk about this thing is that it is considered, the whole idea of automation and so forth is considered now to be a kind of a threat. We're often hearing about the dangers of automation in terms of the workforce. And we do hear people say, well, maybe all of this will mean that we won't need to learn other languages. You know, we can just use our devices. We can just use Google Translate. Maybe we'll have robots who can teach us, or artificial intelligence who can teach us in terms of teaching. In terms of worldwide, the latest, well, I'm sure there are other numbers more recently, but one of the more quoted reports I saw from 2017 estimates that there are 800 million jobs worldwide at risk from automation. This began around 60 or 70 years ago with factory work, probably even longer ago than that. It moved to agricultural work, robots and automation taking care of that more and more. To accounting, it began to move into that area. It's now moving into more clerical and administrative work. The next area that they say is ripe for takeover by robots and automation is transport. And the final frontier that they say are services. And they would probably bulk in teaching along with other services. This is very much a zeitgeist thing. People are often talking about it. One of the candidates in the Democratic race for president made it a central part of his campaign. That was Andrew Yang, whose two main planks of his campaign. One of them was talking about the threat of automation and how this was going to revolutionize everything in the next 30, 40, 50 years. So far I'm talking big picture. What about ELT? Why are we talking about this in a TESOL-SPAIN conference? Well, some speakers have started talking about challenges facing English language teaching in a very serious way of how automation, robots, artificial intelligence, natural language learning from machines and so on might challenge us. Two of these are Scott Thornbury, who in 2019 was talking at a conference about this, about the elephant in the room, he called it, of machine translation, and Ivan Frendo, who's also been talking about robots and artificial intelligence and machine language learning and what that means for language teaching and language teachers. Here are some of the things that they said. Routine tasks, communicative tasks, are being taken over by machines. So think of like the kind of translation type things, the Google Translate, which is getting better and better. Translation devices are getting cheaper, and they're getting more and more popular. Translation software is getting better. I think we all used to poo-poo Google Translate at the very beginning. You could spot it a mile away as a language teacher 5 years ago, maybe. I remember I could, like, so obvious. It's better now. I mean, I still think it's not the best, but it is a lot better. And it's probably getting harder for a very simple text to know. You would only know if you knew that the student wasn't capable of that. There's also, they talk about an increased ability to learn languages on one's own using technology. So your Duolingos, your other apps, other ways of learning online, learning by yourself with technology, without the need for a teacher. And Ivan Frendo talks about how specific industries are seeing a reduced requirement for English language teaching, how teaching in businesses is beginning to go down. So this obviously made me panic. And where do I go? I go straight to willrobotstakemyjob.com. And I typed in the word teacher. And so this, if you want to feel better, this is what willrobotstakemyjob.com. I don't know who built it. I don't know who's behind it. But they say at least that teachers and instructors, 1% chance that teachers will be replaced by AI and robots. So totally safe, right? Okay. But I kind of think that that's right. Because I think even though the arguments that AI and robots may make us either obsolete or will take our jobs are based on assumptions that I would question. There are three main assumptions that I would question on this. The first assumption is that people learn languages mostly for transactional and utilitarian reasons. Okay, I'm going to go into each of these in turn. The second assumption, I think, on whether robots would take our jobs or whether Google Translate and translation things will mean that we're obsolete, is that people would be fine not being able to speak another language if they could get something or someone to do it for them. That if all things were equal and you could have somebody or something to speak another language for you, that the majority of people would be fine and not want to learn that. I don't know if that's true. And also, the third one, more controversial, but perhaps I think is also true, that translation and interpretation are processes that can eventually be stripped of human interference. So let's look at each of these in turn. People learn languages mostly for transactional and utilitarian reasons. I think if anyone looked at the last 20 years of course books and the change of course books from the 1960s or 1950s to now, you would be forgiven for thinking that most people are learning English for transactional reasons. A lot of course books now are very much oriented towards, and a lot of our teaching is oriented towards English for travel, English for the real world, English for doing things, English for getting by. A lot of our English for specific purposes is also utilitarian and transactional, okay? We do things like functional English, real world English, useful English. Things like literature, poetry and stuff, not so much. Things like the joy of learning a language just for the sake of learning a language, not so much. I speak Spanish and French, and I have the luxury sometimes of speaking to Spanish and French teachers. Especially French teachers, it's so interesting. The French teachers are still all about culture and the loveliness of French because most of their learners, think about it, if you learn French, you probably want to parler français and learn about Paris, and maybe not Paris, but it's not the same as learning English, which is the kind of I need it for the job. Lots of people learning French want it because they want to speak French. They like the sound of it. It's not so much that with English because we have so many more people. However, even if that is true, let's imagine that it is true, that many learners want to learn it for utilitarian reasons. There are two problems that mean that we wouldn't be able to just replace it with software. Fortunately or unfortunately, and I think most of us in this room would say unfortunately, English continues to be and is showing no signs of abating of being a gatekeeper to education and jobs. So as long as we have international exams, for universities, even for universities in other countries that English is not the main language, as long as we have English as a requirement for immigration purposes to countries, and some countries are reinstalling English as a purpose for that, as long as we have all of that, then that's going to be a counterbalance to the idea that we could just get by with a device. that there will be forces wanting to make sure people learn English because they'll want to keep those gates up for whatever reason, for jobs, education, immigration. The other reason is a nicer reason, I think, is that maybe not lots, but I think there are still some people who like learning languages because they like languages. I know if you teach segundo de eso or primero de eso, what my friend calls el batallón. I know if you teach el batallón, none of them really want to learn English, but maybe there are one or two. But if you teach in private language schools, you probably see more people who are learning English because they want to learn English. Maybe we are now seeing more older people learning English because they want to speak English, they want to keep their brains alert. So I don't think that's going to go away. It might not be as much as it has been in the past 30 years. Maybe some of the people will peel off and just use a translating device, but not all of them. The second assumption is that people would be fine being able to speak another language if they can get someone or something to do it for them. So the idea is that you would be fine if I could just have a translation device. And by the way, that big chunky one there was a translation device I wrote about 15 years ago that was used by the US military. I even had an interview with the Defense Department contractor who had helped design it, called the Phraslator, where you would shout something into the machine and it would shout it back out, in this case in Iraqi. But the idea is that most people would be fine with this. And that if we could just have that, then I don't care. I don't really want to speak it. I just need it to get things done. And if someone else can do that, then that's best. However, I question this. I still think that knowing another language is a sign of cultural capital. Think of, especially here in Spain, and I know there's a big thing about Spanish people making fun of other Spanish people for their English, but it becomes especially true when we look at our leaders or people in positions of authority or whatever, how when they can't speak English, when they say a café con leche or whatever it was that Ana Botella said, that we make fun of that in Spain. Or Rajoy, back in the day, Obama said something to him and he said, we make fun of that because we think it's a sign of like lacking something. It's a sign of like, yeah, not that good. You should really be able to speak. So I think there is still that idea that if you speak another language, that is cultural capital, as opposed to economic capital or social capital. So a cultural capital. And also, I think it is, and has always been, part of an important parts of a child's education. I think children learning another language has been something that, even if we went back 100 years, children being forced to learn Latin and Greek, dead languages. Why? Because it was considered good for your soul, good for your mind. And I don't think that that's entirely gone away. I travel to enough countries where people talk about, yes, they're learning English at like 4 years old. Whether or not that works is a different question, but it is considered like an important kind of thing. So I think people would feel that we'd be losing that if we took that out of a child's education and said it's okay because the machines will take care of that. I don't think people would be as cool with that as others might assume. Finally, the third assumption is that translation and interpretation are processes that can eventually be stripped of the need for human interference. So I talked before about Google Translate, how it used to be bad and now it's getting good. So some people say, yeah, and in 5 years it's going to be better. I spoke a lot about this in another talk that I gave on technology, the in 5 years syndrome. Everything seems to be like, in 5 years, in just a few years. Well, I've been hearing like in a few years for around 20 years now for many things, and they haven't all come true. Things like ebooks replacing all books, things like everyone learning everything online, loads of stories, I could go on. And one of them is that, well, it's getting better and better, and we'll just keep getting better and better. And while I do think it is better and better, I went and looked at societies of interpreters and translators, and I went to see their journals to see what they're saying, right? And they're adamant that it won't ever get to the point of like a human being able to translate things, because there are a few reasons for that. First of all, is that most real-time machine interpreting works best in routine exchange of information with a predictable outcome. Okay? So what I mean by that is, and Scott Thornbury even mentioned this, he's like, oh, I was able to take a taxi and I could just give the address into my phone and then it said it in the language, and then he said something to me and it said in the language. Well, that's a very routine thing, like I want to go to hotel whatever. Okay, yes. Do I take the highway or the other road? Take the highway. Or how much is this? It's Those are routine exchanges of information. It's the same thing with Alexa. Alexa is great when you say, play Bruce Springsteen, or what's the weather in Salamanca? What time is the train? Those are routine things. Alexa is harder when you say, what should I do today to improve my English? Sorry, Lindsay, I don't understand what you asked me. It's also because nuance, humor, poetry, history, and symbolism are all important parts of translation that AI always struggles with, especially symbolism and history. Nuance and cultural stuff as well. It consistently struggles with that. And the last one that I want to mention, because it's apropos of our theme of inclusivity, there, I got inclusivity in, second last one. The other thing is, I like this, what a journal on interpreters said, is that there is a difference between rendering a text readable and rendering a text understandable. So you can make something that you can read, but make it really understandable. And this is why in translations, if you've read translations, you can say, that's a bad translation and that's a good translation of a work. If you read a book translated, there's bad ones and there's good ones. And finally, this is the link. Algorithms and machine translations have their own bias. They have their own subconscious bias, which has been widely analyzed in terms of what's happening with Alexa and Siri and the way Amazon programs its algorithms that often skew towards male, young, able-bodied, and heterosexual. Those are often the skews that they're not even really aware of it. That's how the algorithm is being fed. And they also have their own explicit biases. And if any of you have, well, I'm sure all of you have sent WhatsApp messages or tried to type things which the machine doesn't like you typing into your text message. Have any of you tried to, I don't know about Spanish, but in English, like Google, WhatsApp, and everything like that, they're really prudish when you try to type in bad words. Here's an example of something that I mean. So I just found this as an example online. What the duck is your problem? God donut, I meant duck. My ducking phone won't let me ducking cuss. And then the other person says, I know we're supposed to be mad at each other and everything, but this is too funny. Shut up, you ducking shut head. You know what? Screw this, bye. But it's anyone who has done that. Duck is the default thing that Google corrects. It corrects F-U-C-K to D-U-C-K. And so you almost have to retrain it. And that is a very conscious bias that they're doing. It's a kind of, Apple does it too. There's a whole bunch of words that you're like, I can't type what I want to say. And it's not because they don't understand. It's because they understand exactly that, and they've made a decision to not let you say that. So you kind of have to, you can force your machine to learn those words. But it's an example that if they can do that, there's other things that they can maybe do or change or whatever. It's not neutral. There are people making these decisions behind it. There are people behind the algorithms. Here, yes. Hey, autocorrect, quick ducking my swear words. You can go to heel, mother forklift. I want to get that sweatshirt, actually. Okay. The other thing I want to mention in my talk here, I got 5 minutes, I'm not sure because I started a bit late, so I don't want to go over too much. I want to mention about the methodology behind the machines as well, because that's an important thing when we look at if robots are going to take over lessons or classes or artificial intelligence is going to take a role, what's the methodology that they talk about? And there's, I have two things here. The image on the left is from the Jetsons. It's a robot teaching the Jetsons, a television show in the United States from the 1960s. You see the children all sitting in rows and the robot standing in front of them there. But on the other side, we have 2008, Second Life, which was not robots, but it was like a technology, like virtual world. And some of the things that were written about Second Life, which was supposed to revolutionize teaching in a new and modern way, is that the classes being built in Second Life looked an awful lot like classes of the old days. So you had this kind of new revolutionary way of learning, but then you put the students in rows in the class and have the teacher at the front with a lectern. Seemed very much like old-fashioned methodology. This has been sometimes called by the author Larry Cuban the reversion to norm effect, so that things will slowly go back to the way, like, you know, with all the will in the world, you're like, we're going to do something that's totally new and different, it's going to be so cool, but then it begins to go back to an old-fashioned way. I've never found this more true than when I've been looking at something like Duolingo. Now, I like Duolingo, and I do recommend Duolingo to my students. Do you know Duolingo? Everyone knows it? I recommend it. It's good for what it does. But let's be honest with ourselves. Duolingo is gap fill. It's restricted practice activities. Duolingo's only one right answer. It uses translation. It has decontextualized sentences. There's an amazing website called WTF Duolingo, which is collections of like the weirdest sentences they ask you to translate. Things like, I do not like dead people, or I don't know, I can't remember what the other ones, but they're really weird ones. It's more focused on form than on use. Now, taking a look at this thing, as language teachers, to me, that's not modern cutting-edge methodology. That's pretty well known, and in some quarters, been taken down. It's audiolingual in some ways. It's got a role in the classroom, but what happened to communication? What happened to our communicative approach to all the other things that we've been talking about in the last 30 years? And I think in some ways, it goes all the way back to the earliest teaching machines, which were invented by someone who a lot of us know if we know our teaching methodology. Who's this person? It's B.F. Skinner, who was one of the first creators of the early teaching machines. B.F. Skinner, who's also best known for behaviorism and the kind of father of the audiolingual method. This is an image of the earliest Skinner machine, which is from 1965. And it kind of forms the basis. It's the bedrock of a lot of what has happened since in terms of machines, AI, and so on and so forth. I don't know enough about the ins and outs of behaviorism to kind of go into detail, but I think there was a lot of that there in modern education technology and the methodology of the machines. Let's talk about robots, though. Here's a picture. Doesn't that look scary? I don't know if you can see it. That terrifying image at the top there. That's the Japanese robot teacher Saya from 2009. So Saya was deployed in classes as a training thing to see if the robot could teach classes. A rather dry article in The Guardian noted, the Japanese robot teacher cannot do much more than take the register and shout orders like, be quiet, be quiet. Okay, so maybe I'm making a straw man there. I took 2009, not fair, right? So let's go to 2018 and talk to a European project called L2Tor, which is El Tutor. And this was the company making El Tutor, I'll show you a picture of El Tutor in a moment, claimed that it's possible to design emphatic machines. Our robot, El Tutor, will notice tears, smiles, frowns, yawns, and dynamically adjust to how a child feels. So they were claiming that the robot would be able to adapt and adjust and detect feelings. This is El Tutor in action, detecting the child's feeling. However, a research team at University of Notre Dame used it to identify children's boredom, confusion, and delight. In more than one-third of instances, it recognized nothing at all. Kids wriggled, covered their faces with their hands, talked with their friends, all sorts of things, except sitting still in front of the cameras. The robot did not react. And even when it did react, it didn't really not to know what to do. It maybe could successfully identify an emotion, but that's only one challenge. Knowing how to react to it is another. What should a robot do with a 5-year-old who's frustrated or has just thrown a paper airplane right into its robotic face? So, again, not gotten that much farther. And also, coming back to our original thing, I want to share with you some stuff that has really been eye-opening to me in learning about this, and that's technology's dirty little secret in terms of robots and AI. I started coming across articles like this. You may have seen some of them too. Behind every robot is a human. Hundreds of human reviewers across the globe, from Romania to Venezuela, listen to audio clips recorded from Amazon Echo speakers, usually without the owner's knowledge, Bloomberg reported in 2019. We knew Alexa was listening. Now we know someone else is too. So there was that came out. So just Alexa? No. Siri, same problem. Apple contractors regularly hear confidential details on Siri recordings. Workers hear drug deals, medical deaths, and people having sex, says Whistleblower, July 2019. So this is because, it's not because they're doing this massive surveillance thing. The idea behind this is that they had contracted workers to be able to help train Siri and Alexa. So they had to just test the machine by having all these hundreds of people listen to the recordings. The scandal is that people didn't know that these people were listening. But this is not the first time that our magic algorithms are actually powered by people behind them. Have any of you used one of these CAPTCHA things? Yeah, CAPTCHA, when you have to enter like a password and it's like you have to say, I am not a robot, and then type the words. Well, CAPTCHA was, I don't have the details for it now, but CAPTCHA was built and was a free thing, but then they sold the data to Google to help transcribe loads of stuff and recognize handwriting. So what all of that, like transcriptions of handwriting, transcriptions of stuff and everything like that Google was doing, was all of us doing it for them when we do our things. They would take all that data and then sell it back so that you could recognize that that's an R, or the machine could recognize it. But it was all of us recognizing it. So it was the genius of CAPTCHA, look it up, of how they used everybody, all of us, to drive the data that then seemed magical when you wrote something on and Google said, that says this. You're like, wow, they know that. Closer to home, okay, we're going big picture, let's go back to ELT. The people at ELT Jam, Nick Robinson, who some of you may know, did a great project where they built a bot called Ame. And it was WhatsApp Ame, and I will help you. And so the idea was it was a bot inside of WhatsApp that you could send a message to asking for a word, and the bot would translate it for you and say it back to you, right? And they said it was amazing. They'd built this bot that could do on-the-spot translations via WhatsApp. But Nick told me, he said, to get it up and working, we had to do it ourselves to help begin to train the machine. But they never kind of got past that because they had so many requests for it. And so it was always, and half the time people were saying, ¿Eres una persona o una máquina? And they were like, but it was all people. But they were saying it's a bot, or they were trying to build the bot, but it was people behind it. And it never reached the final bot stage. It kind of stopped there. Why do I also know this? There's another thing that's called human intelligence tasks, HITs. These are things like that you can get work doing. So this is the gig economy, you may have heard. The gig economy at its worst are people who are transcribing text from audio files. So they're doing like 1 million of those at a cent a minute, cent an item, for example, or they're recognizing images. So all those things, when you also have to say, click all the things that are traffic lights. That's training, that's us doing the work for the machine. So that's being used then in an AI. Screening inappropriate content, classifying objects, verifying data on websites. This is all stuff that's called human intelligence tasks that tech companies are using. And the biggest irony of all of these things, of humans behind the algorithm, is that Amazon has named their program, their service to do this, the Amazon Mechanical Turk. So remember the Mechanical Turk I talked to you about at the beginning? Amazon has a service. Look it up, Amazon Mechanical Turk, where you can get piecemeal work doing stuff that supposedly algorithms are doing for us. No, we are doing it all for each other. I've had my own experience doing this. I've worked with app companies. I still enjoy working on tech projects and things like that, but I've worked on a vocabulary learning app where the app was supposed to anticipate the student's mistakes and correct it. And so it would seem like magic. The app would know why you made a mistake. Of course, me and 2 other poor guys were trying to anticipate all the mistakes on like a gazillion sentences. And we'd have to like anticipate like, okay, this is probably a language interference, maybe not, I'm not sure. We'd have to write all the possible options so that it would seem like magic when the app would say, this is a translation problem, this is a grammar mistake because you don't know this. And of course, it was never really that fine-tuned. So, coming to the end of the talk here. My conclusions are, as you can probably guess, I think in terms of what artificial intelligence and robots actually do now, the dream is way, way beyond the reality. So all those robot dream stuff, the Babel fish, etc., I still think we're pretty far off from that. The other thing I think is that the key driver of artificial intelligence applications, and by implication robots, is cost reduction. Some of the biggest costs in education are teachers. So arguments that AI and robots are not there to replace the teachers but make their lives easier, you may have heard that, should be taken with a pinch of salt. because it's always sold that way. It's to make our lives easier, but it's often going to be to reduce the cost. And in a way, another more existential question is, what system is best to protect and sustain the individual in a digital age? A public education system or multinational corporations? Which are we better off with? That's an open question for you to think about. I think despite claims that robots can become social robots and images that we have of old people in old people's homes with a robot dog or children with a robot toy or whatever, I don't think AI and robots have really bridged that gap. I doubt they will, but that's me. I think it is also important to realize that it's the effective, personal side of teaching that is still crucial. And people in favor of AI will say, no, we totally agree with that. It is, you're still so important. I think even if we look at the talks here, and I would recommend looking at any of those plenaries that we have on inclusivity. I think plenaries, genuine inclusive practices in ELT, even the one that Judith is giving tomorrow on universal design and inclusive practices, Sarah Mercer's talk on teaching English and life skills. I think these are the kind of things that AI and robots would struggle enormously with. And yet we, in 2020, are identifying these as key things that are important for us as a profession. I think even some of the talks you may be going afterwards here, Paul Drury's talk, Nurturing Creativity, Michelle's talk. Okay, she's talking about interactive VR adventures, but that's obviously going to be with a teacher leading the adventure and so on. I think all of these will show how key it is, the teacher in that personal side of teaching. So I think that we shouldn't be afraid to say so when we hear teachers are coming for the jobs, or maybe robots will take teachers, or maybe, I think the more popular thing to say is now, maybe we won't need teachers anymore. I think it's important for us to stand up and say, no, I think we will, because we know. And I think we need to stand up to stories of those inevitable decline that we often hear associated with technology, because I don't think we should be afraid that robots will come for our jobs in the near future. Thank you very much.